On today's show, the Rockets re-signing center Steven Adams, what keeping the big Kiwi means for Houston going forward, plus Jabari Smith Jr. looking to evolve this offseason. It's all coming up right here at Locked On Rockets.
This is Mission Control, Houston.
Ignition sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
What's up and welcome to another edition of Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast, home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. As always, I'm your host, Jackson Gatlin, native Houstonian and credentialed media member. I'm also the host of Locked On NBA Thursdays. Be sure to follow along wherever you listen to your podcasts or on YouTube. Just search Locked On Rockets, where the best way you can help us grow our show is to listen every single day on a podcast platform of your choosing, and then like, comment, subscribe on YouTube. Now, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. Just head on over to FanDuel.com. And as always, thanks so much for making Locked On Rockets part of your day every single day, whether it's on your way to work, on your lunch break, in the gym. Thank you so much for being an everydayer. Exciting news on today's show, as Steven Adams will be back next season with the Houston Rockets.
Hell yeah, brother.
Excited to see the news that the Rockets were able to re-sign the big man. Became a very quick fan favorite here in Houston, and his on the court as well as his off the court impact has been immeasurable for this Rockets team. That's not true. The on the court impact is very measurable. He's great. The advanced numbers love him. He's an analytics darling, and his sheer just on-off impact is absurd. So I guess I can't really say that. But it's great that the Rockets were able to keep Steven Adams. Talk about the deal. We'll talk about what it means for Houston going forward, being able to retain his services. Plus, a little bit later on in the show, in our third segment, we'll take a look at Jabari Smith Jr., who conducted an interview with Ari Alexander of KPRC2, talking about some of the things that he's working on this offseason. Could we see Jabari evolve next year into a potentially bigger role? All right, so let's start with the official news here coming from Shams Charania of ESPN. Houston Rockets center Steven Adams has agreed to a 3-year, $39 million contract extension to stay with the franchise, sources tell ESPN. After playing a key rotation and leadership role in the Rockets' playoff run, the new deal keeps a top center out of free agency. Adams expressed a tremendous desire to stay with the Rockets long-term, and Houston's front office matched the enthusiasm to reach an agreement Saturday. Great stuff all around, because there was a legitimate, albeit a smallish concern, but a very legitimate concern at one point that I talked about on this show recently, that the Rockets were a little worried that they might get priced out of keeping Steven Adams, right? And the number that we talked about here was, 3 years, $45 million. So average annual value of $15 million a year. And that was like the floor in my mind. And that was the floor in a lot of other people's minds too, is like what the Rockets were going to have to pay to keep Steven Adams in this role. And, the idea that trying to think about what he wanted moving forward, and did he want to be a starter? Did he want to go, find a different playoff team to start for, have a bigger role? Was he content coming off the bench? Does he like being here in Houston? And all the signs point to the latter of those kind of, list of potential, outcomes here. Adams, Houston embraced Steven Adams. Steven Adams embraced Houston. He went on IG after the news broke and basically said, happy to be back, Houston fam. So he's excited to, continue his career with the Rockets. And here's the big thing is, again, kind of looking at the expected cost of keeping Steven Adams, right? Paying $15 million a year for your backup center, as good as Steven Adams is, there becomes a point where it's like, okay, how much are you comfortable paying to a backup big? And that was the area of concern for the Rockets is, if he were to command more than that 15 million, right? If you start talking about 16, 17, 18, 20 million a year, as good as Steven Adams is, that would have been the area where the Rockets would have started to seriously weigh their options and decide, okay, do we keep him or do we let him walk? And thankfully, it seems like both sides were able to come to terms on a very team-friendly deal. And that's the other thing is in the aftermath of this news, I said on social media, I was like, that is a steal of a deal for the Houston Rockets. Steven Adams on an average annual value contract of $13 million a year is absurd. Reminder, This guy led the Rockets in like raw plus minus in the first round against the Warriors. He has been able to play alongside their best player in Alperen Sengun in the double big lineup. So he's not just limited to traditional backup center minutes. He's the best offensive rebounder in the NBA, brings you great size, brings you the rebounding, brings you great defensive IQ and instincts. The ability to play a variety of different ways, great veteran presence, great locker room presence for these young guys, a guy who's been in the playoffs pretty consistently throughout his career, so he knows what it takes, how to be a professional, all these great things, both on and off the court. So keeping him around for $13 million a year, it was kind of funny watching some Rockets fans react to this news and be like, oh, what an overpay for Adams. That's too much money. And this and like, tell me you don't know ball without telling me you don't know ball. Steven Adams at $13 million a year is an absurd value for this Rockets team. That's huge. Like, so credit to the Rockets front office and Rafael Stone for getting the deal done. Credit to Steven Adams too, because here's the thing is he likely could have commanded more money than this on the open market. Now, I don't know if there was a team that would have been able to pay him more than per se, like the non-tax MLE this offseason. But I think that one of the factors, and we talked about this at one point on the show, one of the factors at play here for Adams was likely that the Rockets were incredibly supportive of him during his rehabilitation process, right? They traded for him and he was still hurt. Came to Houston, a year and a half ago, mid-season, for the second round pick package, and was around the team a little bit, but then went back to focusing on his rehab process and making that knee, that leg stronger, getting back to basketball playing shape, and then kind of ramping up the process this past offseason. And then he was playing this last year, but he still wasn't 100%. For most of this season, right? Wasn't playing back-to-backs, was playing, on limited minutes at times. And in working with the Rockets, at no point did it feel like the Rockets like pressured him or pushed him to, overexert himself. And I think that level of compassion and understanding while he was trying to get his body back to 100% probably went a very long way in deciding that this is the place that he wanted to stay, that this is where he envisions, the next stage of his career taking place. And I think that just speaks to the person that Steven Adams is, to the character that he has, right? That he wanted to kind of repay the loyalty of the Houston Rockets and be like, no, I want to be here. You guys were patient with me while I got back to 100%. And I would even say, I don't even know if we know that Adams is at 100% yet, right? Like we might have only seen 80% Steven Adams, 85% Steven Adams this past year. Obviously things ramped up and he was playing a considerable minutes load in the playoffs, but having one more offseason of rest, rehabilitation, and coming into next year, not having to load manage, not having to, not play back-to-backs, being able to be 100% from the jump, we might still see an even better version of Steven Adams in a Rockets jersey than what we've seen so far. So exciting stuff all around. Great stuff by the Rockets front office to secure Adams on this long-term deal. Coming up, we'll talk about what this means for the Rockets moving forward. We'll get into the breakdown of the contract as well as how this impacts some of the Houston Rockets' other offseason decisions. We're going to get there in just one moment. First, today's episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Ever check your bank account and wonder, where did all my money go? I know it's happened to me a few times. Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment costs, it can be easy to lose track. That's where Monarch Money comes in, your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place. So you stop just managing your money and start building your wealth. When I started using Monarch, frankly, I was a little embarrassed at how much I realized I was spending on food, like just dining out at restaurants or paying for food delivery or fast food, like all this stuff. Now I budget smarter and I save more. So take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNBA at monarchmoney.com for 50% off of your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNBA for half off your first year. And continuing on here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. All right, now let's get into some of the potential impacts that this Steven Adams signing will have for the Houston Rockets as it relates to the rest of their offseason and some of what it means for a little bit further down the line as well. And I will say, I do want to apologize for the tardiness on this episode. This news came out Saturday afternoon. I was in Indiana for a personal trip unrelated to the NBA Finals. And then when I came back Sunday afternoon, I apologize. I live over here in the Spring area, and it was like storming, raining, like we lost power, didn't get it back until late Sunday evening. And so by then it was just, a travel day. I was exhausted. So like, here we are. And so we will be tackling the new reports in the KD trade saga, all that stuff as well as it relates to the Houston Rockets. Rockets appearing to be one of the finalists for potentially landing Kevin Durant this offseason. So we'll unpack that in our very next episode. So be on the lookout for that. But continuing the Steven Adams discussion, let's start with the contract. So 3 years, $39 million, but here's the breakdown. So first off, it's fully guaranteed. There's no options, team, player, or otherwise. He'll be making $14.1 million the first year, a flat $13 million the next year, and then $11.9 million the final year. I'm rounding a little bit here. So it's a descending contract, which is great because in those latter years, right, especially that tertiary year, the Rockets are going to be, a team that are likely project to be flirting with, being at least a first apron team, likely maybe even a second apron team down the line, depending on, extensions for guys like Jabari Smith Jr, Tari, Eason, and then Thompson and his rookie scale max that is likely to be commanded somewhere down the line. So for the Rockets to be able to get Adams on a descending contract is great. It's also a very tradable contract. Not that I'm going to be advertising trading Steven Adams right after rejoicing in the fact that the Rockets were able to retain him, but even just using this offseason as the example, we've realized just how difficult it can be to try and construct trades when you don't have many of those mid-tier salary contracts to be able to aggregate together and throw at a potential player or involving in a potential trade somewhere down the line. So that's at least something to consider here, that it gives the Rockets yet another kind of mid-tier salary that isn't one of the members of the young core on their rookie scale deals, i.e. Jabari Smith Jr. or Amin Thompson or Reed Shepherd, that kind of stuff. So at least that's important and I think worth noting a little bit here. One other really significant factor to consider about how this signing impacts the Rockets' decision-making the rest of this offseason is if they keep that number 10 overall selection, the likelihood of them drafting a big man has plummeted to all but 0%. There was, again, that brief little bit of concern that the Rockets may lose Steven Adams this offseason. And if that were to be the case, that they might have pivoted on draft night and looked to draft one of Kaman Maluach or Derek Queen with that 10th overall selection as kind of a holdover for that backup big position in order to backfill those minutes. Doesn't appear to be the case now. Look, they're going to be locked in with Alperen Sengun and Steven Adams as your 1-2 punch at the 5 spot for the foreseeable future. So no more big man radar. Hell, we might not even do another big man breakdown here on the show. It doesn't even seem worth it at this point. And in fact, even when we did the draft profile on Kaman Maluach, one of the reasons that we did it was because I heard tell through the grapevine that there was a small possibility that the Rockets would lose Steven Adams, that they would look at one of Derek Queen or Kaman Maluach. So now that they've re-inked Steven Adams to a new deal, it's just not going to happen, right? If they keep that 10th overall pick, it's not going to be a big man. Doesn't make sense now. There's no minutes for him. And unless they want to, come way out of left field with, some trade centered on Alperen Sengun for Giannis or something absurd like that, which seems increasingly more unlikely to be the case this offseason based on all the reporting and posturing coming out of Milwaukee, but never say never. Then I don't know, but I feel very confident in saying that 10th overall pick, assuming right, Sengun and Adams are going to be Rockets next season, which seems to be the case, then that 10th overall pick is not going to be used for a center in this year's draft. Here's another really important thing I think to take away from this. Obviously the Rockets have talked a lot about continuity this offseason and bringing back more or less the same team next year. And I think this was kind of step one in that, right? Is figuring out the new deal for Adams. Step two is kind of figuring out how they want to bring Fred VanVleet back, because all signs are pointing to the fact that the Rockets and Fred want that relationship to continue. It's just going to be about how it looks, right? Do they pick up the team option for Fred VanVleet? Do they decline and re-sign on a more team-friendly deal? Given how great the value is on Steven Adams' contract, I would hope that Rafael Stone, using his negotiating tactics, right, would be able to retain Fred on what is likely to be a very team-friendly option, right? Like, I think at this point, the most that I would personally like to see Fred getting paid is 3 years, $75 million, right? So approximately $25 million a year. And that seems like the ceiling, right? $45 million is what we thought for Steven Adams, and Stone was able to get Adams for even less than that. So maybe Stone works his magic and is able to retain Fred on something like 3 years, $60 million, right? $20 million a year, something like that. I don't know. So that's at least part of it, right? The continuity element at play here, retaining the pieces that made this team who it was last season, or who they were last season. And I think maybe one of the biggest things here is, there have been some Rockets fans who think that, the double big lineup is like this kind of like cheesy strat, and, that it doesn't really have legs, and it's kind of a way to mask some of the weaknesses of this team. And albeit it can be some of those things, but this idea that it's not something that you can bank on going forward, or something that other teams are just going to like figure out and expose or what have you. I think the Rockets signing Adams to this deal, and given the success of the double big lineup to close out the regular season, and then in particular in the postseason against the Warriors, I think it paints the picture that, Adams could have very easily left the Rockets and signed the non-taxpayer MLE somewhere else and been either a starting caliber big, at minimum, right? Like that's what he could have achieved in another organization, wearing another jersey, what have you. And so I do think that there's a world here where Adams, given how productive he still is at this stage in his career, likely is going to be somewhere in that 20 to 25 minute a night range right out of the gate next season, right? Remember, they had to slow play Steven Adams in the rotation for the better part of like half this past season, right? No back-to-backs, limited minutes, all this stuff. Assuming he comes in at 100% tip-top shape this next year, then the Rockets are going to be able to use that double big lineup right out of the gate. They're going to be able to have Alperen and Sengun playing 35-ish minutes a night. Steven Adams soaks up the rest of the minutes at the 5, but then there's also going to be anywhere from 8 to 10 minutes a game where those two guys are sharing the court with one another, where we might see lineups where Adams and Sengun are closing games together, given how effective it was this past season. Now, it's unfortunate that the Rockets really didn't discover that lineup until late in the season, but they got a ton of use out of it, and it became incredibly effective as a counter in the playoffs. And I think that them re-signing Adams to this deal kind of shows, hey, we believe in this lineup going forward. And like we believe in Steven Adams. And I think that it shows probably some confidence in the Rockets' ability to manage both Sengun and Adams and have those two guys coexisting in substantial roles on this team moving forward, right? So the Rockets have a number of pieces that are locked in, that are not going anywhere, right? And Steven Adams seems to be one of those pieces. Sengun appears to be one of those pieces. Thompson appears to be one of those pieces. There's still some question marks about some of the other guys on this roster, and we'll get into those with the KD rumors and all that other stuff taking place. But at least for now, right, the Rockets have a really great kind of front court center dynamic being built with Sengun and Adams at that 5 spot. And that's a duo that can play alongside each other, right? Maybe this deal doesn't happen if the Rockets aren't confident in Adams' ability to play alongside Sengun, because maybe he wanted a bigger role, right? Maybe he wants to play 25 minutes or so a night and feels like he has more to contribute than just being a backup big, right? And because of that, the Rockets are able to make this thing work because of Steven Adams' ability to play alongside Alperen and Sengun. I don't think that can be overstated in the importance of figuring out this dynamic here and how Adams will kind of impact things moving forward. So great get for the Rockets. Fantastic news to kind of kick off this portion of the NBA offseason. I want your thoughts on the Rockets keeping Steven Adams. How do you feel about the structure of the deal, the value of the deal? What are you most looking forward to about Adams being in Houston long-term? Give me your thoughts in the YouTube comments. Coming up, Jabari Smith Jr. looking to evolve this offseason. How much better can he be next year? We're going to get there in just one moment. First, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. The NBA Finals are here, and every night delivers highlight-worthy performances, major momentum shifts, and can't-miss moments. Whether it's a game-winning shot or a breakout player, there's never been a better time to get in on the action. FanDuel makes it so easy to stay in the game before tip-off and live. With player props, performance trends, and same-game parlays, fans have more ways than ever to play smart and win big. Right now, you can head on over to FanDuel.com to take a look at the Game 5 betting favorites. Right now, the OKC Thunder, 9.5 favorites to win game 5. That all important game 5 to go up 3-2 in the series. But we've seen the Pacers have some upsets. So maybe you want to put plus 9.5 down on Indiana in this one. Still the series favorites, OKC now minus 520 favorites to walk away this year's NBA champions. So for all those odds and more, head on over to FanDuel.com. If you're new to FanDuel, it's the perfect time to sign up. Head to FanDuel.com and place your first $5 bet. If it wins, you'll get $200 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, official sports betting partner of the NBA. And final segment here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. All right, let's hear from Ari Alexander of KPRC2 in his interview with Jabari Smith Jr., finding out what Jabari's been working on this offseason.
Jabari, you're working out with Aaron Miller this offseason. You didn't take a ton of time off. Why was it important for you to come back and get working on stuff quickly?
Just the mindset. You know what I'm saying? I was very hungry. We didn't finish the season how we wanted to, so I just was ready to get back in the gym and work on what I need to work on. You know what I'm saying? I want to have a big summer and come back next year looking like a whole different player. So that was the main reason behind that.
What do you like about what Aaron does?
It's just real technical, real attention to detail. Work on a lot of different things that I need to work on. So I just like how detailed it is and how down to the science it is. I like it.
So what can we expect? Because you said there's things you want to change. What can we expect next year out of you?
Just honestly, just a whole different confidence in my ball handling, confidence in me being able to create my own shot, and also just a up motor, stronger. You know what I'm saying? Just a whole different player. Honestly, I just want to change and just come back different.
The last one for you. You got your first taste of playoff basketball. What was it like just playing in that tough of a series, and what is that feeling that you guys came up short?
It was super fun. It was just a great experience. Obviously, we didn't end how we wanted to. We felt like we were the better team, so I'm not going to use age as the excuse. You know what I'm saying? I feel like we could have done things better to win the series, but we're just ready to get back there. We know how hard it is to get back there. We know how hard it is to win a series. You know what I'm saying? So it's just ready to get back to that moment and we'll be ready for it. So, yeah, I'm excited.
All right. So first, shout out to Aaron Miller, who's been doing some fantastic work with guys up and down the Rockets roster. Really started, with Cam Whitmore, and then kind of has really slowly started to branch out and really work with a lot of other Rockets up and down the team. Has worked with Aaron Holiday a bit, has worked with Jeff Green a bit, has done a lot of work with Tari Eason, and now Jabari Smith Jr. So, Aaron's been on this program before. He's doing some really great work with this Rockets team, so appreciate him as always. But really sounds like from Jabari, right, targeting a few different things here. And look, I maintain as one of the founding members of the Jabari Jungle that if the Rockets are able to keep Jabari Smith Jr. out of any potential, trade talks, what have you, it's not for lack of talent that Jabari hasn't been able to flourish yet. It's just that through these first, few seasons, he's very much been expected to just fulfill a role player's role. There have been other guys who have, skill sets that more immediately translate into being these offensive focal points or engines or what have you. Year one under Silas, just, ball it up, throw it out. First couple years under Ime, right? Like Jabari has been, your premier role player, right? 3-and-D guy on offense, or 3-and-D guy across the board, right? Offensively, spot up, knock down your threes. They've used him situationally in certain mismatches here and there with his size, his length, playing over the top. Depending on mismatches, like when he's playing at the 5 versus, when he's in the jumbo lineups with Sengun and Adams and he's all the way down at the 3. Like there's certain things that, he's been able to do, but he hasn't been really, it kind of feels like the Rockets haven't even really scratched the surface as to what is there and available. And part of that is, Jabari's own limitations, right? Highlighting some of the areas that he really does need to be able to improve on in order to turn himself into more of a dynamic player. Defensively, he's awesome, right? Incredibly versatile on defense, can play, multiple positions on that side of the floor. You can scale him up to the 5, you can scale him down and have him guard, wings, or even switching out onto guards, that kind of thing. It's fantastic. But offensively, there's been a little bit of a limitation in his game, right? And a lot of that boils down to, ball handling and, shot creation ability. There were times, in the playoffs against the Warriors where Jabari would get the ball on a switch because he'd have a guard on him, right? And he'd have the clear, distinct height advantage. but he'd start to dribble into pressure and he'd turn the ball over or lose balance or lose his dribble, or the second player would come over and trap him, and it would end with some ugly possessions. So Jabari is a guy who has all the physical gifts and the shooting touch in the world to be kind of this really nice kind of go-to scorer if the Rockets really wanted to develop and grow him in that capacity. So it sounds like, right, the few things that he pointed out that he's working on this offseason, technical, things that are technical, really paying attention to detail stuff, ball handling and shot creation. That's going to be the really big one, right? And look, Aaron has spent some time working with the trainer in question here, has spent some time working with Tari Eason, right, who jumped out and really kind of showed a little bit more this past season in the way of like his ability to put the ball on the floor, attacking closeouts, getting to a spot on the court, getting to that little turnaround fadeaway in the paint, different things that we hadn't really seen out of Tari in his first, couple years in the NBA. Well, really first like year and some change since he missed most of his second year. But I really do think that, and Jabari saying, that he's going to come back a whole different player. Jabari's never been a guy that lacks for confidence. He's been very critical of himself. I remember having conversations with John Lucas about how Jabari is so incredibly hard on himself because he has such a high standard for how he wants to play and how he believes that he can play. So Jabari saying that he wants to come back a whole different player, right? If you take the Jabari Smith Jr. that we already know and love and tack on even just a little bit of improved ball handling and shot creation, that becomes a tremendously more dynamic player, a guy that can be a little bit more of an offensive go-to option. Maybe not ever somebody who's going to be your number one or number two scorer on a team, but think, Chris Middleton-esque a little bit, at least how, Middleton was able to operate out of the mid-post area of the floor. Maybe not ever quite the ball handler that Middleton was, because again, he ran that Bucks offense during their title run. So not quite to that degree, but I'm talking just play style, playing out of the middle of the floor a little bit, getting to those high post sets with Jabari, letting him play with his back to the basket some against smaller players, operating on mismatches. There's something more there. And for a Rockets team that so desperately needs additional shot creation, needs guys to be able to find their sweet spots on the floor without being spoon-fed buckets, or spoon-fed wide open opportunities from the perimeter, just getting more guys who can attack a defense and get to a spot on the floor and create an opportunity for themselves, that's going to go a really long way for this team next season. So I'm really excited to see what Jabari Smith Jr. is working on, how much he can improve coming into this next season, and how much those skills translate ultimately down the line. And if we do see a Jabari Smith Jr. 2.0 potentially next season, it's really exciting stuff to think about. So shout out to Ari Alexander for the interview. Great stuff as always from him and his work over at KPRC2. If you're not following him, go give him a follow on Twitter. He's fantastic. Love Ari. But with that, that's going to do it for today's episode. Want your thoughts on the Steven Adams signing news? Want your thoughts on what Jabari is working on this offseason? Put all your thoughts in the YouTube comments. Remember, the best way to help us grow the show is to listen every single day on a podcast platform you're choosing, and then like, comment, subscribe on YouTube. But as always, thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening. And we look forward to having you back right here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball.